Greetings, life management students, and happy chapter number 4. So let's kind of see where we're at. Well, if you look at your syllabus, one of the things you're going to notice is that next week we have a test. So our exam number 1 is coming up next week. In order to prepare you for exam number 1, I wanted to do a quiz, so that you would have kind of a taste or a preview of what it's like to take an online exam. And so one of your activities this week is it's just 10 questions, the 10-question quiz. Let's see, you can take the quiz twice. So what that means is that, again, you can have your study guide with you as you're doing your quiz, although you should have prepared or studied for the quiz ahead of time. It's only going to cover chapters 1 through chapter 3. So chapters 1 through chapter 3. You'll have your study guide. You will click on the quiz, or you'll start taking the quiz, and you will just answer the questions as well as you can, and then you will finish the quiz. You will then see your score for the quiz. So if you did not get 10 out of 10, if you missed any questions on that quiz, you can take it a second time. Because my goal here is really to have you, number 1, get used to what the exam questions are going to look like. And this style that you see, the style of questions on this quiz are pretty much just like the exam. Your textbook gives us the questions to ask you for the exam. Number 2, I really want you to learn the information. And the way you learn the information is if you miss something or if you got something incorrect, you can now go ahead and go back to your study guide or go back to the textbook or the PowerPoints, get the correct information, and take the quiz a second time, correcting what you got wrong. And so hopefully you're learning the information more, and you should hopefully come out with a very good score on this quiz. So for week number 4, we will have a quiz worth 10 points for 10 questions. You will have your usual weekly reflection, right? That's worth 20 points every week. And then for the other third activity that we have going on for this week, you are going to be taking kind of like a little quiz type, but there's no rights and wrongs on this. It's a questionnaire, and it's going to tell you more about your learning style, because today's chapter is all about how do we like to learn. There's different ways to learn information, and we're going to learn about what yours is. So I'll talk a little bit more about that activity as I get closer to the slide that talks about it, right? All right, so first of all, what is learning preferences? When we hear that word or see that word, what does that mean? It's really the way that we like to interact or deal with information. It's your preferred way of engaging in critical thinking. So in other words, if you're a visual learner, then you really process information best when you see the information as a graph, or as a picture, or in colors, right? You like visual. Versus if you're an auditory learner, what that means is you really like to listen. And you need to hear someone talking, and you need to repeat things when you are studying for the exam. You need to say the question out loud and repeat the answer out loud, because hearing those things helps you to learn. So all of us, we have different ways of learning. And so we want to find out, what is your way of learning? And then we want to, see how we can learn best using that method. Okay? So again, your learning preferences, it's the way that we prefer to learn. However, it's not the only way we can learn. So in other words, if you say, well, I did the quiz, or I did the assessment test, and it tells me I'm a visual learner. I myself am a visual learner, right? Okay. Does that mean that if you have a podcast, or if you have some learning information auditory, like if you were watching the PowerPoints right now, but there was no video of me in the corner, and all you could hear is my voice, does that mean you can't learn the information? No, that's not what it means, right? So we can still learn information in other ways than our preferred method. It's just we really learn best in our preferred method, right? So I want to make sure you understand, just because you're a visual learner doesn't mean you cannot learn anything else that's not in a visual format. Okay, all right. So there's a couple different really popular like tests or assessments that tell us what kind of learner we are. And one of the big ones is what we call Myers-Briggs, or it's called the MBTI. And what this really, it's kind of from psychology, and it really helps us to see us when we fall into these 4 different dimensions, we fall in at different letters in these dimensions, right? And so I remember when I was actually, gosh, I was in my early 20s maybe, and I was still in college. I was either in grad school or finishing my bachelor's degree. And at that time, I was going to school full time, I had a part-time job, and then I had got called up for service to a federal grand jury. So the federal grand jury is a group of people that serve the federal court for 18 months, for a year and a half long. And you actually get paid for doing this, right? And you hear cases and you decide on whether or not there's enough information that's presented to take this case to trial. So it's really kind of interesting. Anyway, I remember when I was called up, I was in a group of individuals, and I was probably one of the youngest people there. I'm in my early 20s, right? So I'm looking at all these older individuals who have much more career experience than I do. And it so happens that when the judge is asking each of us questions, because he's trying to pick the 15 people that will be on this panel for the next year and a half. And he's asking us different questions. One of the questions the judge asks us is, have you taken the Myers-Briggs personality test? And if you have, what is your score, right? And so it's really interesting because a lot of people who had many more years experience on me had not taken this test. I did, right? So actually I had to take it for a job. So when one of the jobs that I had, the employer required me to take this test before they hired me. And so I found out what my score was, if you will, on this test. And so when I was being interviewed by the judge, I told the judge, here's my ratings for the Myers-Briggs tests. I also told the judge that I felt that I was kind of underrepresented. In other words, I felt it was a good idea to have a voice of a young person on this federal grand jury. You're talking about people's future here. And I think it was good to have a diverse group of people who come from different backgrounds, different age groups, different people of color, all different socioeconomic status would be ideal. And so I actually got hired. Yeah. So he chose one person to be the foreperson, and then I was chosen as the deputy foreperson. And then we had about 13 other people that were on the panel with us. So it was a really exciting experience for the next year and a half. But I really think one of the reasons I got the job was because I had taken this test and I knew what my rating was. And so the Myers-Briggs is really popular. Employers use it, different colleges use it. Again, it's a personality assessment. It does cost about $18 to take the test. When I did it, it was free because the employer made me take it, right? But anyway, it's something that's really interesting. And again, if you look here, these are the 4 dimensions of the Myers-Briggs, whether you're an extrovert or introvert, right? Which really has to do with where we focus our energy, whether you're sensing or intuitive, and whether you're thinking, feeling, or whether you're judging and perceiving. And we're going to go through each of these in just a minute here. Right? So these are the 4 dimensions. And for each of these dimensions, you end up, on your scale, end up getting the letter. So if you're an E, it would be you're an extrovert. If you're an I, you're an introvert, right? All right, so this here is the extrovert, introvert kind of category. So think of yourself. Are you more of an action-oriented person? Do you like to actually do things? Or are you the kind of person that is not, you're pretty more cautious? You're not into like stepping out and doing things as much as you are into processing the information that you're thinking about. Do you like spending time with other people? Or do you kind of like spending time with yourself? Are you a gamer or somebody who likes to do more activities that are just with you? Or you like to, the kind of person who likes to go out and be really active in clubs and in groups and all that, right? So this would really determine whether you're an extrovert or you're an introvert. Where do you focus your energy? Is your energy on engaging with other people, or is your energy on kind of focusing on information within you, processing, right? So if you're sensing or intuitive, sensing people tend to like a lot of details and facts, right? We like to know what is the here and now. I'm not really concerned about the future. I'm concerned about the here and now. Intuitive people are different because they actually like to know not so much what's here and now. They like to think of what's the big picture. What can I think of down the road, right? And so these are a little bit two different ways that we process information or that we learn information, right? Are we the thinking decision makers, or are we feeling decision makers? The thinking decision makers are those who like to really rationalize, analyze information, use logic. They like to make lists of pros and cons, right? Those are our thinkers. The people that are the feelers are the ones who go a little bit more on not just emotion, but they also go on what is best for the group. Or how can we do this, in a way that's going to be most useful to us as a group, right? And so it's a little bit different in the way you, again, process information. Our judging learners versus our perceiving learners, right? So our judging learners like to have routine. There's structure, right? I eat breakfast at this time every day. This is the time I do this. I'm out the door by this time. I like structure. I go to the gym Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I really don't like deviating from that, right? Our perceiving people are the kind of a little bit more fly by the seat of your pants. Like these people are kind of more open to changes. So it's Wednesday night and your friend calls and says, hey, you want to go to the movies? And you're like, yeah, I'll go to the gym tomorrow. No big deal. Whereas the judging person might be like, oh no, I have to go to the gym tomorrow. I can't go to the movies tonight. I can go tomorrow, but I can't go tonight, because they like their routine, right? Others are like, it'll work out, right? And with all of these, there's no rights and wrongs. This is about your personality. This is about who you are. And so all we're trying to do is determine for you to understand more about yourself, which will help you in many areas of life. All right, so you can kind of take time to look at this if you'd like. And if you answer these questions and figure out where are you strong in this area, or are you kind of not so strong in that area? It will help you to understand where you fall. Are you an extrovert or an introvert, right? Are you thinking or feeling, right? So take time to look through that and learn more about yourself. All right. What we have learned here from research is a couple of different things. So we're talking about students who take online classes, which is all of you who are listening to this video or watching this video right now. You are in a completely online class, right? So talking about students who take online classes, what we find from this study is that it's actually many more of you are introverts than extroverts. Okay? And the reason for that is those who take online classes understand they're going to be interacting with the computer. You're going to interact with your computer system. You are going to learn the information online. People who are extroverts tend to like to go to face-to-face classes. They like to have engagement with other students. They like showing up every day. They like the teacher having activities in class and talking to the teacher when they want. So they like that type of thing. And so what we find is more of our online students are introverts. We also find that more of our online students are what we call sensing versus intuitive, meaning that they really like information like these are the facts here and now. This is the information I'm learning. Intuitive learners tend to be those who like theory, and they like to take critical thinking classes because they like to explore ethics, and they like to think what ifs. Whereas your sensing people are not really into the what if, they're into the here and now. What's going on now? All right, so again, I'm not going to go through all of this. I want you to take time. So when you kind of start looking at that chart and figuring out whether or not are you more of an extrovert or an introvert, then you can look at these here and say, all right, if I am an introvert, this is what I need to do. I need to set aside quiet study time because I work best that way. Extroverts, they might like to actually work in a group. They might like to say, hey, anybody want to get together for a group study session for the exam? And we'll quiz each other on questions. That's the extrovert. The introvert is more like, no, I need my study space. I need my nobody bothering me, no loud music. I need my quiet time, right? So look through here and kind of learn more about yourself. Right? Same thing with your sensing or intuitive. Once you determine from that chart, are you more sensing or more intuitive? Now we can look at how can we implement that? If you're sensing, what are some of the things I can do to help me learn, because I find out that I am more of a sensing than an intuitive. Thinking versus feelings, right? So when you're working in a group, you remember that feeling learners prefer to focus on how arguments and theories affect people. In other words, you're thinking of how the feelers work. And feeling people, you need to remember that your thinkers like to focus on logic and analysis, pros and cons. Judging versus perceiving. Again, if you're someone who's a judging, you like to create binders for each of your classes and share your organizational plan with other students. You're very structured. You love structure, right? If you're perceiving, you use spare moments to review class notes and headings in your chapter book. In other words, you're a little bit more like fly by the seat of your pants. You're a little bit more like, I have 10 minutes in between class. I'll go ahead and do some studying now. But you really didn't plan out when you were going to study, right? Again, no rights and wrongs in this. We just need to know what works best for you. Now, this is the one I want to focus on. So we talked about Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, and that's great, but we don't actually have access to Myers-Briggs because, we really couldn't pay the $18 fee for all of us to take the exam. However, this one is going to be available to you, and this is actually going to be one of your activities for this week. So this is what we call the Vark model, and the Vark is an acronym. An acronym means that each letter stands for a word or an idea. So Vark, the V stands for visual learner. The A stands for oral or auditory learner, listening. The R stands for the read and write learner, and the K stands for the kinesthetic learner. Let me explain what they are. So the visual learner, again, these are people who like things visually. So they love it when we see graphs and charts and diagrams and colors and images, and all of that really speaks to me. I like seeing things visually. The oral learners or the auditory learners, these are people who really prefer listening to information. So you like podcasts. You like listening to your professor's lectures because that listening. You like discussions with group members that are auditory because you can hear what they're saying. So you really like to learn that way. The read and write learners, these are the people who prefer to learn through their textbook because what they're doing is they like the written words in the text. So these people, read, visual and auditory, whatever, but I really get it when I read my textbook. It makes sense to me, right? That's the R, the read and write learners. And the kinesthetic learner is different. The kinesthetic learner really likes to learn kind of more hands-on. So they like to learn by making something themselves or by observing how other people do it. In other words, think of if you were to use Legos to build a structure. That's the kinesthetic learner. I was never big into Legos because, again, I have no artistic or creative ability whatsoever. And so if you gave me a bunch of Legos, I would make a block. And that's it, because I can't really think of anything else, right? However, my youngest daughter is just like a Lego freak. I mean, that's what she gets for her birthday and Christmas is a set of Legos because she loves putting them together, and then she keeps them up on a shelf and displays them, and she doesn't mess them up or anything. And so she loves Legos, just absolutely loves them, right? So kinesthetic learner, they want to do something hands-on. More than just watch the information or listen to the information, they actually learn from, again, doing it themselves, right? So this is Vark, V-A-R-K. So what you're going to do for one of your activities this week is you're going to actually go to some of the pages in your textbook. Hold on, let me get your textbook. Okay, so it's actually page 84 and 85 of your textbook. And so if we look at page 84 and 85 of your textbook, you're going to see there is 16 questions. It's a questionnaire with 16 questions here. And this is the Vark questionnaire. And so I want you to do this in your book. However, I don't want you to write in your book. Since again, remember, these books are on loan. And so you're not to write in the book, but I do want you to go ahead and fill out your answer. There's a score sheet here. And so I want you to be able to list off of your questions. You're going to tally up all of your A's and B's and C's and D's for your answers, and it gives you instructions on how to figure out what was your #1 learning style. And again, there's no rights and wrongs in this. This should be fun because answering questions about you is a good thing. And so you're going to answer those questions. You're going to come up with your highest score and your lowest score, right? And then on your activity assignment in Canvas, I'm going to ask you to tell me, what was your highest, what was your lowest, and there's a couple other questions there to talk about. Now that we know your learning style or your preferred methods of learning, how can we implement them? What things can you do now that you've figured out what you are, like how you like to learn? If you're an auditory learner, what can we do? Right? How can we learn better knowing that you're an auditory learner, right? And so this again should be really helpful to you because it's just always fun to figure out like more about you. All right, so again, here's the Vark. So the visual learner, these people, what we should be doing is highlighting our text, underlining. I like to put Post-it notes, little clear ones on the edges of my textbook and come back to those pages so I know what I'm looking at. We love to do diagrams and pictures and things that make sense to us. I always make notes, and it's like if I read something and I think of an example that makes sense to me, then I'm going to write the example down that makes sense to me. Because when I come back to it, I'll go, oh yeah, this talks about this, and I remember the example, and now I got it, right? Ask your instructor for copies of, all of the different materials, right? That's why I love to post up the PowerPoint slides for you, because you can come back to it at a later date and time, and it helps you to remember. Our auditory or oral learners, right? You like to study in groups and discuss concepts because hearing the information out loud makes sense to you. You like to record lectures. Again, I have other students in my other classes that will listen to these videos without watching the video. So in other words, if they're commuting, they will just play the video, but they can't look at the video, but they can hear me talking. And the hearing me talking, especially when I talk about the exam, the hearing me talking helps them to remember the information, right? So recording lectures, right? When we get to the R, the read and write learners. So these learners, revise your notes. So revise and reorganize your notes after every class, because going through that written material over and over again helps you to remember, right? Write out answers to possible test questions before the exam. So again, writing things out. For me, I am a visual learner, but one of the ways that I really liked to solidify the information when I used to study, when I was in college, is I would actually take my study guide. So the study guide that you have there, if a professor gave out a study guide, or my notes, I would take that, and before the exam, I would rewrite the whole thing. I would rewrite it on a separate paper. I would write the question. I would write my answers. And that is one of the ways that I also learned, because I could see it. Writing it out just did something for me too. And so that's one of my learning methods. The kinesthetic learner needs to find ways to do the information hands-on. So incorporate movement into your note-taking by drawing charts and diagrams or things that make sense to you, right? Take breaks from studying. So these people, they don't enjoy long periods of learning. And so, for instance, if you're in my night class, well, we have class from 5 to 8 p.m. That's a long time for students to be sitting down learning. So we do a couple different activities during that class to break up the time, because I know that students need to get up and stretch, and they need to kind of do that so that they can continue the learning process. All right, so this again will be your activity for this week. All right, working in groups. So when we talk about working in groups, what we know is that working in groups contributes to learning and success in college. And I'll tell you right now, in college, you have to work in groups. It's just the way it works. Sometimes I didn't always enjoy it because it's not fair. Because, right, think of this scenario. You have a group of 4 team members, right? You guys say, okay, everybody, let's show up at the library at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. We're all going to divide up the work that we're going to do. And then for our presentation, everyone's going to have a chance to talk about something, right? So you show up at the library and there's somebody in your group missing. And then you guys call them and you say, okay, well, you weren't here. We're just going to tell you that this is what you have to do for the activity. And we're going to meet on Friday night at 7 o'clock. Friday night comes, they're not there. Next week, they're not there. They're not there. However, the day of the presentation, they show up. Right? And they say, they kind of do their little 10-minute thing off who knows what. You guys have never heard it before because they didn't work in your group. They just did it on their own. And yet, you're all graded the same because it's a group activity. Is that frustrating? Yes. But is that the way it works? Yes. So we have to learn how to work in groups, right? For the most part, though, working in groups can be really, really helpful. That's why for all of my face-to-face classes, I put my students in groups. I make them do group work because I know they don't want to, number one. And when you go to get your jobs or do different activities, you're going to have to work with people. And because I think that we learn better when I break you up in groups, right? So it can be challenging. If you're a visual learner and you're working with people who are kinesthetic learners or auditory learners, you're different. You're different, but you have to start to be empathetic or understand other people's learning styles, right? All right, so working in groups, when we are working together in groups, a couple things to think about when you're participating in this group. First of all, when I go into the group, I always kind of do what I call like an observation first. So that means that I want to figure out, I get into a group and I want to analyze the group. I want to start listening and figure out what's going on. So I want to look for, number one, what kind of group is this? What are our goals and objectives? So is this a study group that our goal is to get together to study for the exams? Is this group, do we have a group project that we have to do an oral presentation on? What kind of group is this, right? What are the goals and objectives? Number two, I'm gonna learn very quickly who is the alpha. Have you ever been in a group like that, right? You're into a group and within 5 minutes you can tell, oh my gosh, those two people are arguing because they're both alphas. They both wanna be the leader. And the leader is typically the loudest person or the person who is trying to dominate the group. And so you need to figure that out. Now that's not bad. All groups need leaders, that's okay. But we need to kind of figure that out. Okay, who's the leader, right? And then what are the rules? That's what norms mean. So what is the rules? Is this a formal group or an informal group, right? And then how do we communicate? Does everyone go around and get their chance to talk? Or is it really the people that are extroverts that kind of jump in and talk? Are they the ones who do most of the talking and the rest of us sit back and don't say much, right? How does it work? And then think about, if you're in this group, how do you conform to the group? Are you the kind of person that's going to change your opinion because you don't want to rock the boat? So if you're in a group, like in some of my other classes, we talk about a lot of heavy topics, things like the death penalty, things like genetic selection. And so there's some strong feelings. We talk about, is it ethical to throw away embryos, unborn babies, right? So we talk about these topics and students have strong opinions about these topics. So if you're in a group of people and they all think, oh yeah, no, we're good, no problem, throwing away embryos, it's not life, no problem. But you come from a background where you feel like an embryo is life and I feel like that's wrong, right? Are you going to say anything about that? Or do you let the other dominant group members kind of just lead the way and you conform to whatever they want, right? And a lot of the reason that would be is because you have low self-belief. So when you feel like you can't articulate or speak up for yourself, then you end up conforming because you're not able to really feel that you're strong enough to go against the others. Right? Groupthink is when basically we accept what everyone else says because, number one, maybe I don't really care enough. And number two, I just really don't put the time and thought into thinking for myself, right? And so that kind of groupthink means that I'll just go along with the flow. Whatever you guys say, I'll do, sure. So these are some of the kind of challenges and things we need to think about when we work in groups. All right, so differences in teaching and learning preferences. So sometimes me as a teacher may not match you as a learner, right? This is why, though, I try to do a couple different things in all my classes. So I try, number one, to do videos. Obviously, if you're in my face-to-face class, you don't get a video, you get me face-to-face. However, I'm trying to do videos for our auditory, our visual learners who like that, and our auditory learners who like to hear me talking, versus if I didn't have this video here, you would be clicking through slides with nothing else. And my goal is to give you more information about the slide. And so let's clarify what this means, or give you an example of what I'm talking about, right? And so I also do videos because I want to have the closed captioning on the video. So if you click on the button that says CC on your video, you will see the words. And I always, actually, for all of my videos, I like to watch, when I watch movies, I like to see the words because I process better that way. And so I want to capture those people who like to read and who like, to learn visually there. And then I do a lot of activities in my classes, right? So I'm trying to catch the kinesthetic learners, the ones who want to do something to process it, right? And so I'm trying to, but not all teachers are that way. I don't want you to leave this college class thinking that the next college class you take, whether it's at Delta or anywhere else in the state, is going to have a professor who makes videos weekly, because more than likely it's not. Right? Unfortunately, most of our faculty is not on board with this style because it is work. It is more work, maybe I should say. And so I don't want you to think that's the norm, because it's not the norm. It's really the against the norm. It's the outlier, or the rare occasion. And so you may have an online class where you were used to my teaching, and all of a sudden you take an online class, and this professor just has a lot of PowerPoints for you to go through and learn the material on your own. Read the book, look at the PowerPoint, and figure it out, right? And you're like, oh man, this is like not what I had before. And so maybe it doesn't match with your visual learning style. Right? So you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. So you're going to have to do some of these activities to, if you don't get that visual aspect, what can I do to figure out how to learn from an auditory way? Maybe your professor does podcasts, but they don't do a video. Right? How can I learn there? Right? And so here's some suggestions for that. So I want to talk for a few minutes about learning disabilities, because I think these are really, really important. So learning disability, what is a learning disability? So a learning disability is, the short end of it is, there's a difference in the way that your mind processes information. There's a difference in the way your mind works. That's what it is, right? It's learning difference that can cause significant difficulty in listening, speaking, reading, writing, spelling, and interacting socially, right? So that means people who have dyslexia, right? Dyslexia is when you look at a paper, most of us start to read from left to right. Dyslexia, that doesn't happen. What happens is there's kind of this disconnect between your visual, what you're seeing, and how your brain processes the information. And so when they look at a sentence, the sentence doesn't go from left to right, it's jumbled up. And so therefore the words don't always make sense. Right? People who have English as a second language can struggle with learning disabilities in their mind, in processing information. When we have ADHD, we have some disabilities and challenges, because with ADHD, you have a hard time focusing. Focus is very difficult, very difficult. When I taught third grade, I knew which of my students had ADHD, because you could not say, oh, Jimmy, sit down for this hour and do this worksheet. Jimmy can't sit down for an hour and do a worksheet. He cannot focus, and he's hyperactive, right? And so these are all challenges. Now, does that mean that people with learning disabilities cannot learn? Excuse me, no. So people with learning disabilities can learn. They just need some support. And what we call the support is the word accommodations. Right? So students who have a diagnosed disability are eligible for accommodations, and the accommodations help them to learn. So at Delta College, we have a program called DSPS. It's basically the Disability Students Support Program. And students go here, and every semester I have students in my class that have a variety of learning disabilities. Right now in one of my classes, it's one of my large classes. I have well over 120 students in this class, and I have a student that is deaf. So she's completely deaf. So she has 2 interpreters in the class. And so these interpreters take turns and they sign to her what I am saying. However, she has questions. And so when she has questions, she has to go through the interpreter to ask me the question. She wants me to put up my videos for her with closed captioning, because the closed captioning helps her to process this or understand the information, correct? And so, you know, there's a lot of extra things I need to do. I have other students in my class that have learning disabilities, and what they do is, instead of taking the final exam or the exams in the classroom, they actually get to go to a quiet place with just them in a room, and they get double the time because their brain needs more time to process the information. Right? So there's an idea with a lot of students with a lot of disabilities, and what we do with accommodations is, you know, these are, like I said, I just gave you some examples of adaptations made to the learning environment to make it easier for that person to learn. So whether it's taking the test in a quiet room, whether it's getting more time for the test, whether it's having videos with closed captioning, having interpreters in the room. I've had students who are blind in my classroom with their service animal, right? And you know, there's challenges here, but we make it work. In general, though, I want to make sure you understand that the purpose of the support or accommodation is not to give students with disabilities an advantage or a leg up. It is kind of to make it equal. It's to make it so they can learn the information just like somebody who doesn't have a disability would learn the information. They need some support to make it so that they can learn correctly. It doesn't advantage them in any way. Okay, right? But I mean, this is really, really big. Number one, I think we have a lot of students who have undiagnosed learning disabilities, and that's a concern. So in other words, maybe you just always thought you were stupid. I just can't read. Again, a lot of the foster youth that I work with, you know, they literally count when they do math, they count on their fingers. Like, you know, 7 plus 3. Because they missed so much school in elementary school, they didn't learn their math facts. They didn't learn them. And therefore, these kind of things are really difficult for them. I worked with foster youth who were misdiagnosed with disabilities, and they didn't have those disabilities, you know. And so I think it's really important, if you do continue down this road of education and higher education, that you make sure that if you feel like you have any challenges or just wonder, you can go and be assessed. In other words, you can go to this program and say, you know, it's just really hard for me to read and learn. I don't know why. Okay, let's do some testing and we can find out if maybe there's something that that is undiagnosed, that we want to diagnose it so we can get you some support. Okay, so that's something to think about, right? All right, so, okay, one more, sorry. Now, talking about your learning preferences in your job and your future career, right? So working in a team, as I said, you're going to do a lot of it in college, group work. In work, you're going to do a lot of it too. Yeah, so you have to kind of get used to, and we're going to talk more down the road about relationships, working relationships in general, how important it is to develop some healthy, good relationships. At work, the more you understand your learning preference style and that of your boss or your supervisor or coworkers, the more you can customize how you work together to achieve individual and organizational goals. So for instance, let's say I remember the first time I was coming up in my career and my jobs, you know, the first time that my boss allowed me to do a presentation to a group in my company. Well, okay, so I had to determine, what do I want to do? Do I want to do a PowerPoint presentation? Do I want to do a board and have pictures on the board? Do I want to do a whiteboard and write on the whiteboard? How do I want to present the information, right? And so that's going to happen in your job, hopefully. And so the more you understand the people that are in that meeting, the more you can tailor it. My goal would be to have very different, capture the visual learner, the auditory learner, the kinesthetic learner, and the read and write learner. I want to capture everyone because they could all be there in my audience, right? All right, so that was this week. We're talking about learning styles. I want you to understand your learning style and do your activities this week. In addition, hopefully the quiz will help give you a sense of what's ahead for our exam. Remember, our exam will cover chapters 1 through 5. What I'm thinking I might do is go ahead and post chapter 5 a little bit early. So you might see it over by Friday or over the weekend. The reason is because I want to give you as much time as possible to learn the information from chapter 5 so you're ready for the exam, right? And so again, the exam will be next week. In addition, I want to start deviating or veering away from our learning material in the book. We'll still cover it. So we're still going to cover the material in the book. However, I want to talk about some things that I think are really important in life, about relationships and about stress and different things that really, all of us experience them. And so I want to start talking about that. And it's a little different from our textbook information, but it's also a little bit more exciting, right? Okay, guys, so I hope you have a great week and I will see you next time.